Hi there, Scott Heron here again for our next CVI Sukur presentation. This is video number 10 in the series, presentation number 10. And here we're looking again in the OUV vulnerability, but we're focusing now on the sensitivity term. Once again, we see our CVI framework, and here we're looking at that green term in the upper section of the CVI framework. As we just spoke about for the climate exposure term, here now we look at the response of the property, the sensitivity of the property to those three key climate stresses. And I'd like to take a little bit more time now in this table than we did for the exposure term to give you the opportunity to look through these definitions. Now, I'll note first off that these are adapted from IUCN, so natural heritage perspectives, but these have been modified to speak holistically across World Heritage values. And so you'll see there that the different levels of sensitivity move from key World Heritage values remaining essentially intact and the overall condition of the property is stable or improving, to level 2, some loss or alteration of a few of the key World Heritage values, but not with persistent or lasting effects. Under level 3, a moderate sensitivity would reflect some loss or changes to some of the key World Heritage values, but not causing a significant reduction of OUV. In contrast, level 4 now speaks to the loss or alteration of many key World Heritage values that would lead to a significant reduction of OUV. And finally, in level 5, there's the potential for a major loss or substantial alteration of the majority of key World Heritage values and an associated substantial reduction of OUV. Again, as we reflected, it's very important to make sure that we consider these terms across the entire property. We're not doing it for every key value separately. We're not doing it for any small geographic part of the property. We're looking at the property as a whole and the values as a whole. So just as we did for the exposure term, we look at our exemplar key stresses here. Again, this is just as an example. We're not intending these to be indicative for Sukur. We will make assessments in each of our breakout groups for the level of sensitivity of the property to, in the face of each of those climate stresses. Again, as we did for exposure, we will look at some modifiers that can vary the sensitivity. So here you'll see that one of these sensitivity modifiers reflects the spatial scale at which the climate stressor may affect the property. And you'll see the different categories there, restricted in the lowest 10% of area, all the way up to very widespread in the highest 10% of the area. So the great majority of the area being impacted. The second of these modifiers, the compounding factors, is when we start to see interactions between climate change effects and the effects of other non-climate or indeed other climate stresses linking together. So the sum of the parts being worse than either of the pieces themselves. And here you'll see the categories go from the very highest probability of those compounding factors occurring down to a very unlikely or an unknown issue. But what do we mean by compounding factors? This is relevant when we're already seeing other stresses occurring on a property. And so this may include the decay of materials, mold, mildew, acid rain. It could include the destabilization of structures, for example, earthquakes or subsidence. And it could be cumulative impacts due to other factors such as tourism. So these compounding factors, we like to suggest here that you think of this as what are the non-climate factors that together with climate change influences would become worse. Again, as I stated, the modifiers and the assessment for sensitivity need to be considered across the entire property. Once the scores have been undertaken by each breakout group, reflecting the sensitivity of the entire property in the face of the 3 identified key climate stresses and each modifier in the face of the 3 key climate change stresses, those values will combine together and be linked into the master spreadsheet that is used to track the CVI assessment. Once we have exposure and sensitivity, we're able to assess the potential impact on the outstanding universal value. This is undertaken using a risk matrix approach, which you can see illustrated now. So where there is a very unlikely level of exposure or a very low level of sensitivity, then the potential impact is low. However, if the exposure is very likely and the sensitivity of the property to that exposure is very high, then we get the other end of the impact spectrum, the extreme level. It's important here again to note that this sensitivity is about the present response of the property's combined values and attributes to each of the 3 key climate stresses. You should not consider how the property may adapt in the future, because that is actually the topic of our next element. That's the adaptive capacity assessment.